pass over to Jeffrey Davis, who's going to be doing a presentation on water, power, and possibility, lessons from the page for Utah's watershed future. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad you're here. I like to think of myself as fairly dynamic speaker, but you've had some incredible speakers yesterday and today. So, don't judge me on them, just judge me on me, okay? I come here almost every year, but who has never heard me speak before? Okay, good. Okay, so then I can go, who has heard me speak before? Okay, so the people that have raised their hands, you should know that if you don't remember anything about my talk, you remember my daily mantra, right? Okay. So I'm very passionate about water and groundwater. And I used to say I had two passions in life: running in the mountains with my dog, or groundwater. Those are my two passions. And over the last few years, I have a third passion, and that is my grandchildren. Okay. But for me, I have this daily mantra that I share every day with my friends and family members. And that is, every day it is important to touch nature, drink water, and be kind. Okay? So if you don't remember anything else about what I'm going to talk about this next half hour, remember, Jeff is the touch nature, drink water, be kind guy. Okay? Okay. This talk, here's another little piece about me. Okay. When people ask me, what do you do? Because I travel and I work all over the world, and I spend a lot of time in the mountains. And so people that are close to me don't think I actually work, and so they ask me, they're like, what do you do? And for a number of years, I used to tell people I solve water problems. But probably 3 years ago, I changed that answer to I define water problems. And the problems that we face here, the challenges that we face here in Utah and in the West, it's really important to correctly define those problems. So if you ask, if you sit me at lunch and you ask me what I do, I define water problems. Okay? And this talk is a little bit different than ones I've given in the past. Ones in the past have been a little more on the technical side. Okay? But this one I'm pretty passionate about because I am a ferocious reader, okay? I consume literature. And a friend of mine last year, he was like, man, you read so much, you should share some of that stuff that you read. And I was like, oh, okay. And I thought, this would be a fantastic presentation for this group of people. Because if it's one thing I've learned about coming to this, I've come to almost every single one of these symposiums. And that is the people that are here are extremely passionate and interested about getting involved and learning about what's going on and how I can get involved and how I can participate in solving problems like the Great Salt Lake or our canyon watersheds, or whatever topics that we've been talking about yesterday and today. Okay. So to give you a little introduction, I'm going to share with you 7 books that I've read this year that are applicable to the challenges we face here in Utah. Okay. I gave this talk a few weeks ago, and of the 7 books, 6 of them, nobody in the room had ever even read. And I was like, oh, it was really discouraging. And then there was one book that a couple of people. Now, I am betting because of the nature of the people here, I'm going to get people that have read probably all 7 of them. Hopefully, I'm hoping. But I want the whole idea of this talk is to make the argument that I bet we can learn from literature. And that can help us unite ourselves in the cause. It can help us create and build and make good policy and help us learn from the past. Okay? So that's kind of the introduction. So to frame that conversation, I want you to kind of open your mind and go, oh, okay, I see what Jeff is trying to do here. He's trying to help us understand how literature can benefit us in solving these challenges. Okay. I think we can all agree why books matter. They foster reflection. They tell a story. And this is kind of the thing I wanted to kind of really hit upon, is that literature quite often reveals this undervaluation, let's say, of water, or say the Great Salt Lake, inequity, resilience, and conflict. Okay? Cool. Okay, so the first book that I'm going to talk about is called Liquid Asset. Who has read this book? Seriously? Okay. Buzz Thompson, he's a professor at Stanford University. Okay? I got to meet him in last February at a conference on water investments. I've read this book like 2 or 3 times. Fantastic book if you want to understand water, especially out here in the West, and then compare that to other places in the world. And should water be a commodity? Should water be privately owned? Should water be publicly owned? Because it's done differently, across the world. But this is a fantastic book if you want to understand water and how it's used to benefit the human race. Okay? Talks about pricing, policy. Also, one of my things that I spend a lot of time in my career doing, aquifer storage. But it's an excellent book. It's not that long, and it's definitely not technical, but it's an excellent book that helps us understand water and how we might look at it differently and value that instead of just taking for granted when I get up in the morning and I turn on the faucet, there's water. Okay, so I was 0 for 1. Okay, second book. The Alignment Problem. Who's read this book? 0 for 2. Okay, this is a fascinating book about how AI and artificial intelligence started here in the US. And it's called the alignment problem because it's like, well, how do we want to shape how we use AI? This book is a couple years old, And just in a couple of years, we've made tremendous milestones and steps, in how AI is developing with large language models and machine learning. But it's fascinating to read and understand how we were teaching computers in the early days of AI to know, oh, this is a dog, or this is a gorilla, or this is a colored person. Fascinating book, and it really makes you think about how we form policies that are going to help us. And I work in the water industry, and we use AI all the time, and more, both on the large language model side and also on the machine learning side, because we're getting so much data. We're processing more data every day than we can possibly deal with. And so we're using AI to help create and make policy and make decisions that are water related. Okay, hopefully the next one, we're 0 for 2. Water always wins. Who's read this book? 0 for 3. Fascinating book by Erica. She talks about this notion of slow water. Okay? And this movement that we're going to this nature-based approach. And a lot of you I know are involved in those kind of things. Okay? We have really changed. Like let's take an example like stormwater. Okay? Our thought process for stormwater for the longest time was like, get it out of here, move that water as fast as you can to as far away as you can. That was the thought process. That's no longer the thought process. What we want to do now is try to slow that water down. Keep that water. Hold that water as best we can. Okay. So this is a fantastic book about how we tried to control water, failed, and now what are some of the better options in helping us come up with good water policy, especially out here in the West. Okay? Over 3. So, number 4, The Crazies. Who's read this book? Come on! I just must have a weird AI algorithm, huh? Fascinating book. The Crazies are a mountain range in Montana. Okay? So this took place about 10 or 12 years ago when a farmer who was like, I cannot do this anymore. And somebody came and said, why don't we put up some wind farms here? And he was like, oh, I didn't think of that. And the conflict that he had with his billionaire neighbors that said, no way in hell are you putting a wind farm here. Fascinating story about renewable energy and policy and politics and money, environmental justice, all of that wrapped up into this story about what happened near the Crazy Mountains in Montana. Okay. We're 0 for 4. Okay. Yellow Dirt. Who's read this book? 1. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, this one's a little older. This has been around since 2009. Okay? So this book talks about the development of our uranium resources back in the 40s and 50s and 60s and the tragedy that happened largely on Native American land during that time. It's fascinating to look back, 50 years and go, how do we not repeat what we did? And so the message of environmental justice certainly is, very strong in this book. This was fascinating to talk about and to understand, our policies when it applies to mining and it applies to water policy. So it's very, very, very good. Okay, one. Okay, so this next one, I think, I'm hoping every hand comes up because this next book has been around since 1986, okay? So Cadillac Desert. Every hand needs to go up, okay? This is a fantastic book, again, about water and how we've had this insatiable thirst of building dams and controlling water and developing and building cities and water's worth so much. And the decisions that we've made over, decades and decades and hundreds of years. Fantastic book. This is really, really good. And again, back in 86, Mark was talking about this idea for integrated and adaptive technologies or strategies. There's adaptive strategies for using water. And, we've made a lot of headway in that space since 1986, and we can make a lot more, obviously. Okay. So of all those books, this last one is probably my favorite book that I read this year. And I have not met Ernest yet, but The War Below. Who has read this book? Okay, this is probably my most favorite book that of those seven. He's a writer for Reuters, a journalist, and he basically said, okay, we got a situation here. We want a green economy. We want to expand renewable energy. We want to be more of a green economy, a green society. But that comes at a cost. And that cost is either we are 95+% dependent on China, or we have to develop the resources either here in the US or with our allies. So he specifically talks about copper, lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths. Okay? So it's not technical, and it's very informative. And if you have a passion for renewable energy, then you need to read this book. Okay? But by way of how much copper, does anybody know how much copper is required for a single wind turbine? Does anybody have any idea how much copper? Like 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 100 pounds? And if you know the amount per megawatt, I'd be even more impressed. But what? 500 pounds? It's way more than that. Okay? It is about 8,000 pounds per megawatt. Okay? 8,000 pounds. And so the big turbines that you see, the big ones, those are typically 3 megawatt turbines. 23,000 pounds of copper for one. That is a lot of copper. Okay? So you can understand the dilemma that we face. Okay? Great. Okay. So those are my 7 books. and the things that we can learn about them. And it's like, okay, I've written all 7, or I'm going to read 1, So, okay, so what are some challenges we hear? And then I'm going to kind of like connect the dots, right? So challenge, obviously, Ben's talk, and Ben has been here before. I've come here to this symposium talking about the Great Salt Lake. I would say that the knowledge and understanding of the Great Salt Lake, of the people that come here, has been elevated so much over the last 4 or 5 years. It's phenomenal. And so I think we all understand the challenges and the rationale and the need to get water to the Great Salt Lake, right? Okay. Again, a passion of mine: storing water in the ground. We can either build dams to store water, which we lose about 50% of that water stored through evaporation, or we can put that water in the ground. Okay? And so that's a challenge, because we want to store water, especially when we have excess water. We want to be able to put that in the ground. Okay? Climate adaptation. We understand that we have rising temperatures. I mean, just the talks that I went to this morning talked specifically about the changes and the shift between snow and rain, and what's happening with our rock glaciers, and all of that. So we understand that that's a challenge for us here in Utah. And the other one, obviously, is environmental justice. It's the people that live right next to the Great Salt Lake that suffer the most from the dust. That should be recognized and held with, we need to make sure we protect those people. Okay, so those are just like 4 items. Now, how do we connect those? Okay, so these books that I've introduced to you hopefully can help you understand the undervaluation of water that's quite often and the environmental stresses in communities. Okay? That if we look for nature-based solutions and nature-based resiliency, that we're going to be better off, and that we want to ensure justice for our communities and have ethical governance. Okay, I know that's a really difficult thing for our state and other legislatures in other states to do, but we as a community should demand and vote for ethical governance of our natural resources and our well-being. Okay? So what is my call to action to each of you is that we need to rethink our water's value, that not as just as a resource, but that it's life, and to think about water that way. Okay, and that we should highlight that our policymakers and all of us as community members and experts, we all have a role in that sustainable water systems. Okay, and that we, by reading books and gaining that insight, that will just help us. It'll help us be better citizens, better stewards of the land and the water that we so desperately need. Okay, so my closing reflections are: books provide a profound insight to has the power to change our perspective, and water represents more. This was the quote I was looking for on the last slide, but water represents more than just a resource, but it mirrors our values and our collective responsibility. I just love that thought, that sentence. Okay, And our future depends on listening, learning, and leading with empathy toward our water challenges. Okay? So I appreciate your attention. You can scan this and you can get those slides, okay? Or you can just come up to me later and say, hey, how do I get a copy of those slides? Or what were those 7 books again? But I appreciate you coming, and we have a few minutes and I can answer some questions for you.
Out of all of the books you mentioned, what would be most applicable for this region, this Utah County region?
For the what region?
For like the Utah County region. Is there
Utah
anything
County?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, they all are applicable. You really should read Cadillac Desert and Liquid Asset from a water standpoint. But we do have mining in Utah County, so if you want to read that book, they're all good. But Liquid Asset is probably really good. Okay, another question.
I was just curious if you remember from the alignment problem book, if it talked about what seems like the explosion of data centers out west and the gargantuan amounts of water that they use to keep their supercomputers chilled.
It doesn't really. It's more on the AI side, but that is a whole other topic. It's something I'm very passionate about. I lead a national task force on that. There's also more data centers that are being planned to come to Utah. So yeah, it's kind of a whole other topic. That book does not address that, but that is an issue. And I think there are lots of things that we can do to reduce the amount of water that's used in there. But data centers will continue to grow, and they will need water and energy because they're big consumers of both. Just don't tell ChatGPT, thank you for that answer. Just in that will save lots of energy and water. Okay. Any other questions?
Just wondering if you've read a book called Downriver by Heather Hansman.
I have not read that one.
Awesome.
Okay. I
got
will.
one. Yeah, I got one on you.
Downriver.
It's fantastic. Would recommend.
Okay.
To
I will
everybody
put that
here.
on my list.
Thank you.
Your statistic about the number of pounds of copper required per megawatt kind of blew my mind. Does that include the copper in the transmission lines or just in the actual?
Just in that piece, in that one piece.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you would be surprised how much copper is used in, like, say, an EV vehicle. So copper is a huge demand. Diane.
Yes, they're talking more and more about nuclear power plants
Mhm.
and a nuclear power
Yep.
plant in Utah.
Yep.
Do we have enough water to cool nuclear reactors and make that happen here?
Our governor seems to think so. Yeah, so it is going up in, they have plans to do it in Box Elder County, which would take water probably from the Bear. Yeah.
I was just wondering, in your readings, have you come across any books about the emerging problem of PFAS in our water?
There's not a lot of books per se. There's a couple of movies, but about half of the work that I do across the country is involved in cleaning up PFAS-related sites. So there's not a book per se that I'm aware of, but there's tons and tons of literature. And I deal with that on a daily basis because my clients are the main contributors of PFAS.
Is there an effective way to get rid of it?
There are promising mechanisms for PFAS. The idea used to be incineration was the only thing, but They would trap that from going into the air. Yeah. Then it would. Well, it changes the chemistry. Yeah, it changes the chemistry. I do think that we will in the next few years come up with a better solution than what we do now, and that is we pump that water out of the ground, we run it through a carbon and an ion exchange, and then we dispose of that in a hazardous waste landfill, and then we clean the groundwater. That's what we do.